The manga opens with a boy reacting in shock to the announcement of a fishing event scheduled for tomorrow. His surprise comes from the fact that he's never fished before, and he doesn't even own any gear. To make matters worse, tomorrow is Sunday. His boss, however, doesn't seem to care. He simply tells him to buy whatever he needs out of his own pocket. We then learn the boy's name, Sanada Shiro. We then see his boss staring back at him in confusion. Shiro asks if he'll at least be paid for the overtime, but the question only seems to confuse his boss even more, and he never gets a real answer. After finishing his shift, Shiro walks home muttering to himself about what a completely despicable black company he works for. No matter how hard he tries, no one is ever satisfied, and no one rewards him for the effort he puts in. To make it worse, the pay is painfully underwhelming. He decides then and there that he's going to find a new job somewhere people might actually appreciate him. With that thought, he plans to go to bed early for once. But suddenly, the atmosphere around him shifts. When he opens his eyes, he's no longer at home. He's standing on worn marble floors, surrounded by towering castle walls, ancient, crumbling stones stretching in every direction. The sight instantly puts him on edge. Alarmed, he looks around and asks himself where the hell he is. Still confused and shaken, he wonders if he somehow ended up in a foreign country or what kind of place this even is. It finally hits him with a ridiculous thought. Did he die from overwork or heat stroke and get reincarnated into another world? He immediately shakes that idea off. That makes no sense. He clearly remembers waking up this morning, meeting his boss, and heading out for the fishing trip. He remembers getting on the boat, casting his line, and catching a flounder. And then everything becomes blurry. The last thing he can recall is the flounder speaking to him and a sudden black hole opening in the sea, swallowing him whole. Shiro slowly comes to a terrifying conclusion: this really might be another world. The thought alone drains him, leaving him shaken and distressed. But he still can't fully accept it. Maybe it's too soon to jump to that conclusion. Maybe there's another explanation. While he's stuck in that spiral of doubt, someone approaches him. He tries to convince himself that maybe this is just some foreign country after all. But that thought is instantly shattered when a spear comes flying toward him and slams into the wall inches from his face. He looks up and sees a group of armored soldiers closing in on him, their intentions clearly hostile. The soldiers raise their spears and corner him, forcing Shiro to lift his hands in surrender. One of the knights declares that martial law is in effect and demands to know if he's a collaborator with the royal army. Shiro can't even process the accusation. He stammers, asking what they mean by a royal collaborator he genuinely has no idea. In a frightened voice, he blurts out that he's just an employee at a black company and begs them not to stab him. One of the guards suddenly flashes a malicious smile. She assures him they're not going to stab or kill him. He's far too valuable for that. The other guards cheer, celebrating the capture and praising their captain. Then one of them lifts her helmet. Underneath is a woman with razor-like teeth, grinning as she tells Shiro to relax. They won't kill him, but whether he stays safe depends entirely on how well he can satisfy them. They seize Shiro by the arm and tell him he's coming with them. He's in no position to resist. As he's dragged along, he notices something strange. Their language sounds completely foreign, yet he can understand every word. And then another detail hits him. Every single knight surrounding him is a woman. As the night women casually talk about what they're going to do with him, Shiro's mind races. If he can just find a single opening, he might be able to escape. He struggles and tries to pull his arm free, shaking with everything he has. But it's useless. Her grip is impossibly tight. One of the night women looks down at him and calmly asks if he just tried to escape. She tells him to relax, while tightening her grip even more. She assures him they won't hurt him as long as he does exactly what they say. But in his head, Shiro can't stop thinking about how strong she is. He couldn't break free at all. A moment later, he's dragged into a prison chamber. And the night women laugh behind him, their voices echoing menacingly. The captain forces Shiro into a humiliating position, while the other night women argue among themselves about whose turn comes next. They lean in close, circling him, commenting on how surprisingly pleasant his hair smells like flowers. They even note how different it is from their own scent. The attention makes Shiro deeply uneasy. Growing impatient, the knight snaps at Shiro to hurry up and obey. She grabs his head and forces him forward, complaining that he's keeping them waiting. The situation becomes intensely uncomfortable for him, and all he can focus on is the unfamiliar scent around him. The entire moment leaves him shaken and deeply uneasy. The smell overwhelms him, and Shiro suddenly throws up. The other night women panic and try to restrain their captain, shouting for her to stop, but it's too late. In a burst of anger, the captain drives her knee straight into Shiro's stomach. Shiro collapses, crying out in pain. The other night women shout at their captain not to damage him, arguing that she's going too far, but the captain coldly insists she barely touched him. She grabs his face and leans in with a vicious glare, furious that he dared humiliate her. In a low, threatening voice, she promises she'll make him regret it, until he breaks and begs for forgiveness. The atmosphere turns suffocating. Shiro is strapped down onto a bench. As he lies there helpless, the night women begin casually judging his appearance, talking about his looks and physique like he's an object on display. The comments sting. He can't stop thinking about how freely they belittle him, saying whatever they want without hesitation. And then, an uncomfortable memory surfaces back in middle school, during swim class. He remembers saying similar things about girls himself. Overwhelmed, Shiro quietly apologizes in his heart to an old classmate named Yoshida. Now that he's the one being objectified, he finally understands how cruel his words used to be. The captain continues examining him with cold detachment, speaking as if he's nothing more than a tool. She assures the others they don't need to worry, she has a method to keep him useful for as long as they want. Hearing that, Shiro forces a weak smile and wonders if he'll ever make it back to his own world. A world without whatever nightmare this is. And then one word cuts through his thoughts. Magic. He freezes. The captain raises her palm and it begins to glow. The captain grips his head and announces that this is where the real fun begins, telling him to brace himself. A sudden surge of light shoots through his body, racing from his mind downward in a violent flash. Shiro cries out in shock, his entire body jolting from the sensation. Watching calmly, the captain smiles and says they're all set. In a cheerful tone, she asks if he isn't excited for what comes next. Shiro realizes he can't do anything but stare, frozen in place. In his mind, he blames everything on that cursed flounder that dragged him into this world. Just as the situation is about to escalate, the doors burst open. More knights, high-ranking officials rush in, shocked by what they're seeing, and demanding to know what the soldiers think they're doing. A high-ranking official storms into the prison and demands to know what's going on with visible disappointment. The night women freeze instantly, fear written all over their faces. In a rush of excuses, the captain claims they found Shiro wandering the castle courtyard and detained him for questioning. As she speaks, she hurriedly straightens her uniform, trying to regain composure. The official snaps back, shouting, "What questioning? And what about your patrol, you idiots?" She orders them back to their posts immediately. Red-faced with embarrassment, the knights scatter without another word. The official tells Shiro to get dressed. Relief immediately washes over him. Whatever nightmare was about to happen has been stopped. She then calls for someone to enter. A young woman steps inside the chamber. And we learn her identity. She's royalty. Princess Christia. Shiro realizes the girl in front of him is a princess, yet she's standing there in cuffs. He can't understand how someone so important could end up in a place like this. Even so, her presence is striking. She carries herself with a quiet dignity, her beauty almost radiant, her hair catching the light as if it's woven from it. In his thoughts, he concludes that she must normally live the life of a refined noblewoman, the kind of elegance that only comes from royalty. Christia snaps in outrage, demanding how anyone would dare confine her. With a menacing glare, she questions how a member of the royal family could be thrown into a place like this. Watching her, Shiro isn't surprised at all. In his mind, he calmly concludes, she's definitely a feisty one. The high-ranking officer coldly explains to Christia that placing the warrior princess of Regalta under simple house arrest would be disrespectful. They had to take every possible precaution. Christia fires back, insisting the eastern garrison is still standing and that this conflict is far from over. The officer mocks her, asking if she still clings to hope even after the capital has fallen. The words visibly shake Christia, who can't help thinking that none of this would have happened if their general hadn't betrayed them. The officer continues, stating that, Until the execution in 3 days, those cuffs will stay on her, and she'll remain exactly where she is. She adds that if Christia needs anything, she can ask Shiro for assistance, and cruelly suggests she might as well find some comfort in his company while she still can. With that, the door slams shut. Shiro shouts after them in confusion, asking if they're seriously not going to let him out. Christa sinks onto the bench and lets out a heavy sigh, disappointment written all over her face. It's clear she knows things are spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, Shiro can only sit there, staring at her with an awkward, nervous smile. Shiro finally breaks the silence, quietly telling her it looks like she's in a rough situation. The comment makes Christia flinch. He hesitates, then asks what happened to her. She notices how casually he speaks to her, but given that she's already a captive princess, she realizes there's no point clinging to status anymore. Shiro admits he has a few questions. Christia tells him to ask them. His first one is simple. Where are they right now? In a flat, matter-of-fact tone, she answers, they're in a prison. The room falls silent for a few seconds. Christa finally speaks again, explaining that they're in Regalta, the royal capital of the kingdom. She studies him carefully and asks if he might have been brought here from somewhere else. Shiro's mind races. He clenches his fists, struggling to put his thoughts into words. Then, with a determined look, he blurts it out. He's from another world. His words leave the princess completely confused. Shiro quickly spills out the details, introducing himself as Sanada Shiro, a 24-year-old employee trapped in a miserable black company. He explains how his awful boss suddenly ordered a fishing trip, leaving him no choice but to show up half asleep and reluctant. While battling seasickness on the boat, he somehow caught a strange fish, and the next thing he knew, a black portal opened and swallowed him whole, dumping him here. As Shiro finishes explaining his situation, the princess suddenly grabs him and pulls him into a tight hug, overcome with her own despair. The gesture leaves Shiro completely confused and, embarrassingly, a little excited at the same time. She gently tells him that's enough, saying he described that fantasy so vividly it almost sounded real. In a sympathetic tone, she adds that he must have gone through something truly awful to imagine all of that. Her response only confuses Shiro even more. In a world where magic exists, he thought she'd believe him without question. She studies his clothes and politely compliments his outfit, remarking that the Sanada family must be a respectable one. She concludes that it's no wonder the chaos around them would take such a toll on him mentally. Then she pulls him close in a comforting gesture, telling him to stay still and calm down for a moment. Shiro can't help but rethink his first impression. He assumed she'd be hot-tempered, but it turns out she's unexpectedly gentle. The kindness makes him fidget awkwardly. He isn't used to being treated with this kind of soft concern, almost like a child someone is trying to comfort. Christa reassures him that he can relax. She has no intention of doing anything to hurt him. That reassurance makes Shiro relax even more, and without thinking, he leans into her comfort. In his head, he admits he doesn't mind being close to her at all. The warmth is calming in a way he didn't expect, and he finds himself getting carried away by the moment. Lost in thought, he barely notices her voice when she gently asks if something's wrong. Shiro quickly composes himself, scolding his own thoughts. This isn't the time to get carried away. What he needs right now is information, not distractions. He turns back to Princess Christa and asks if there are any men in this country. Since arriving, he hasn't seen a single one. She explains that with the war still ongoing, most of their men are in hiding. Otherwise, she explains, they'd be abducted by Imperial soldiers, just like he was. Shiro asks if that means there are no male soldiers at all. Christa answers plainly, men aren't allowed to serve as soldiers. Seeing his confusion, she gives him a sympathetic look, realizing he truly didn't know. She tells him to listen carefully. In her country, the military is made up entirely of women, and the same is true for their enemy, the Empire of Lurgoa. She goes on to explain that men in this world can't use magic, and compared to women, they're considered physically weaker. In blunt terms, she says men are seen as fragile beings. The statement leaves Shiro even more confused. And then it sinks in if that's true, surviving in this world as someone like him is going to be a serious problem. We're then shown a flashback to Shiro's fishing trip, the one his boss forced him to attend on his only day off. While standing there half-dazed, he suddenly hears a voice, and realizes the flounder he just caught is talking to him. Startled, he lifts the fish, and notices he's the first guest to land a catch. The flounder responds telepathically, calmly telling him it will grant one of his wishes. Shiro starts thinking out loud about what he'd even wish for. Maybe something simple like becoming skilled at crafting, being able to make anything he wants. That actually sounds fun. The flounder suddenly grins and tells him that what he truly desires is creation magic, calling him by name as it says it. The sound of his name freezes Shiro in place. He demands to know how the fish knows who he is, and he tries to ask what creation magic even means. But before he can finish his question, a black hole tears open beneath him, and in an instant, he's pulled inside, transported to another world. That memory snaps us back to the present, right? To the situation Shiro is trapped in now. Princess Christia continues explaining that in this world, men can't use magic and are considered physically weaker than women. In blunt terms, she repeats it, men are seen as fragile beings. Hearing her explanation, Shiro can't help thinking, wait, didn't the flounder give him magic? And he's a man. But the thought is cut short when Princess Christa asks where he came from. Shiro tells her he's from a country called Japan. She asks where that is, and just as he's about to explain, she quickly apologizes. She says it must be hard for him to describe a place she's never heard of, and asks him to forgive her for putting him on the spot. Shiro blinks. So, this is how she sees him. Determined to sound intelligent, he straightens up and gives a formal answer. He explains that Japan is an island nation surrounded by ocean, with a population of roughly 126 million people. He adds that it's an economic powerhouse known for advanced industry, science, and technology. Princess Christa suddenly bursts into laughter, amazed that an island nation could have more than 3 times the population of her entire empire. She calls his story amusing, just like his earlier tale about coming from another world. She assumes he's playing the role of a jester to lift her spirits, and she thanks him for it, apologizing for misunderstanding. But the laughter fades quickly. In a quiet, sad voice, she admits that her execution is only 3 days away, and that she's grateful she gets to spend those final days with him. She then explains his own fate. He won't be killed, but he'll be enslaved, either presented to the nobility as a reward, or sent to the frontier as a pioneer. Shiro suddenly realizes that if the princess can use magic, escaping should be possible. He asks why she doesn't just break out. Christa explains that under normal circumstances, she's one of the top 5 offensive magic users in the entire country. But the cuffs on her wrists are specially designed to seal magic. With them on, she can't even enhance her own strength. Right now, she says, she's no different from an ordinary, powerless person. That's when Shiro's mind starts racing. If they can remove the cuffs, escape might be possible. But outrunning pursuit afterward is another question entirely. Princess Christa quietly apologizes to Shiro, saying his situation is partly her fault. If her kingdom hadn't fallen to the Empire, none of this would have happened to him. Shiro quickly tries to reassure her. He tells her she isn't to blame at all, the real fault lies with the people who captured him, and that cursed flounder. But as he says it, a realization hits him. If he truly has magic, maybe he can help her escape. He turns back to Christa and asks what it takes to use magic, what the rules are, and how it actually works. Princess Christa tells Shiro that the first step to using magic is deep introspection, focusing inward and understanding your own nature. Taking her seriously, Shiro closes his eyes and raises his hands, trying to calm himself and concentrate. In his mind, he calls out to that mysterious flounder, wondering if magic works like a game system. Does he just shout something like, "Status? Open?" Right as the thought crosses his mind, a glowing panel appears in front of him. His sight makes Shiro gasp out loud, startling the princess beside him. Staring at the glowing panel, he sees the words clearly, Level 1, Creation Magic User. That's when it clicks. The flounder hadn't lied to him. He really was given creation magic. He notices the panel even has a search function and wonders if he could create something legendary like a panacea. He pulls it up, and the answer is yes, it's possible. But the cost is absurd. He doesn't have nearly enough level or magic power, and the estimated production time is 247 years. Shiro stares at the number, realizing he'd be long dead before it ever finished. Behind him, Princess Christia calls his name, asking what he's been doing all this time. Shiro excitedly tells Princess Christia to look at this, proudly gesturing toward the glowing panel in front of him. She leans closer and passes her hand straight through it, asking what exactly he wants her to see. That's when Shiro realizes she can't see the panel at all. He hurriedly explains that he can use magic too, which earns him a deeply sympathetic, almost pitying look from her. She pulls him into a gentle, almost maternal hug and speaks softly, telling him to stop saying foolish things. In a pitying tone, she asks how a man could possibly use magic. Holding him close, she says she understands the urge to escape reality, but he needs to pull himself together. She tells Shiro to get some rest, adding that she's going to lie down as well. A moment later, he realizes she's already fallen asleep. Watching her, he can't help thinking how gentle she really is. He quietly pulls away, awkwardly clearing his thoughts, and decides now is the perfect time to examine his magic while he still can. Studying the panel, Shiro realizes that according to the descriptions, the simplest thing he can create right now is water. The production time is listed as 30 minutes, but it looks like that time can shrink as he levels up. Deciding to test it, he raises his hands and closes his eyes. A faint glow gathers around his body as he focuses inward, trying to become aware of his own magic. The sensation feels similar to noticing his own heartbeat, or breathing familiar, but not quite the same. Then it hits him. He doesn't actually know any spells. Maybe he can just trigger it by instinct. He wonders if shouting something like "Activate Creation Magic" would work. And suddenly, a small pop-up appears, displaying the production timer for the water. Shiro watches as the timer begins ticking down. It dawns on him that once the magic is activated, the creation process runs on its own. There's nothing left for him to control. Still thinking it through, his eyes drift across the room, and he notices the mess from earlier is still sitting there. The smell in the room is getting worse, and Shiro starts wondering if there's anything he can use to clean it. His eyes land on a bucket in the corner, and he quickly realizes that's probably their toilet. The thought alone makes him shudder. This place is a breeding ground for disease. If he doesn't act fast, they could easily get sick. He opens his panel again and searches for anything related to medicine, vaccines, antibiotics, anything that might help. He finds penicillin. It's possible to create, but the production time is nearly 47 hours. At least it can be taken orally, so no syringe is needed. He quickly realizes that penicillin isn't realistic right now. He doesn't have the time or the resources. His attention drifts to another option on the panel, golem production. He wonders what it would take to unlock something like that. The smell snaps him back to reality, and he decides that once the water finishes, he'll at least try to clean the place. Maybe he can create a rag or a mop. He checks the panel again. A rag would take 6 hours to produce. Without materials, everything takes forever. With a sigh, he decides he needs a faster solution. He glances over at Princess Christia to make sure she's still asleep. Once he's certain she hasn't stirred, he quietly turns his attention back to his situation, preparing to handle things as discreetly as possible. As Shiro quietly tries to handle the mess, his thoughts spiral. He wonders how he even ended up in a place like this. Back on the fishing boat, there must be chaos by now. Maybe they think he fell overboard. Maybe it's being treated as a maritime accident. He even wonders if insurance would cover something like that. Then his thoughts drift to his parents. They must be worried sick. Will he ever make it back to his own world? Reality snaps back hard. In this ridiculous situation, he's forced to improvise just to clean up, and the absurdity of it all almost makes him laugh. Suddenly, Princess Christia stirs awake. She looks at Shiro and quietly asks if he's crying. Shiro stands there shaking, and he realizes the tears aren't fake, they're coming from real guilt. He can't push down anymore. Seeing this, Princess Christia rushes over and wraps her arms around him from behind, softly murmuring about how gentle he really is. Holding him gently, Princess Christia says in a sorrowful voice that he must have been trying to comfort her, even with her death hanging over everything. Hearing that, Shiro realizes that's how she's interpreted the whole scene. She tells him that if it hurts enough to make him cry, he doesn't need to force himself for her sake. Seizing the moment, Shiro leans into the misunderstanding and quietly insists he's not pushing himself. He just feels sorry for her. Shiro suddenly becomes aware that he's been leaning hard into the cute act, and a wave of embarrassment hits him as he wonders if he overdid it. But judging by the way Princess Christia looks at him, it worked. She finds him genuinely adorable. and that realization secretly makes him proud. Smiling softly, she reassures him that he doesn't need to worry. She has plenty of experience dealing with men, and she reaches up, brushing her hand lightly against his shirt. As she continues fussing over him, Shiro can't help thinking he never imagined a day would come when someone would care for him like this. The warmth of it all feels strangely comforting. She tells him to turn around, and he obeys without thinking. Then she mentions her jacket feels too tight and asks if he could help loosen it. Shiro eagerly agrees. But before he can move, a notification flashes across his panel. The water production is complete, and it asks him to choose where it should appear. The notification sends Shiro into a panic. He frantically taps at the panel, trying to stall the process. The timing couldn't be worse. Completely misreading the situation, Princess Christia gently asks if he's flustered, and tells him there's no reason to be embarrassed. But Shiro barely hears her. His entire focus is locked on the panel, desperately trying to decide where the water should appear. He blurts out that that's not the problem at all, though Christia clearly thinks she understands what's going through his head. She quietly concludes that Shiro is just being modest. Meanwhile, the glowing panel is still frozen in front of him. Misreading his panic, she reassures him that he doesn't have to be shy. Shiro, however, has already given up trying to argue. He hurriedly tells the panel to place the water in the corner right where the mess from earlier was. He suddenly realizes that creating water would normally require a container. After a second thought, he pushes the problem aside and decides to forget the magic for now and focus on the situation in front of him. Looking back at Princess Christia, he can't shake the feeling that her mood has flipped completely, like someone switched her personality in an instant. Sitting together on the bench, she softly compliments Shiro, telling him he did well and that he can call her Chris. She holds him close, her voice gentle. Then she lets out a quiet sigh and murmurs that, at least now, she has no regrets left in this world. Shiro slowly sits up, realizing how close Chris had grown to him in such a short time. The warmth between them lingers, and he can't help but wonder how quickly two people can bond when they're forced to rely on each other. Then the reality crashes back in 3 days, she would be executed. And that was something he absolutely refused to accept. His eyes drift to the cuffs around her wrists. If they could just remove those, he's certain they could change everything. On their second night in the prison, Chris suddenly tells Shiro to step away from the bunk. Before he can ask why, she drives her heel into the corner of the frame. The wood splinters with a sharp crack. She kneels, pulling free a jagged shard from the broken edge, her expression shifting as realization settles in. Watching her do that, Shiro realizes she can still exert terrifying strength even with her magic sealed, and he's left wondering what suddenly came over her. Then Chris calmly tells him her plan: she's going to sever her own wrist. When Shiro hears this, he has a completely shocked and blank expression. Chris then explains that she'll be able to use this magic if she is able to remove the handcuffs. She might not be able to use healing magic, but she can cauterize the wound with fire magic and stop the bleeding. She then lifts up her arm and explains that she is going to destroy as much bone as possible with the first blow. Then she needs him to tear off the remaining flesh and skin. Shiro trembles in fear. Nervously, he tells her not to be hasty to stop. He insists that he's definitely going to remove those cuffs for her. As he tries to persuade her, he glances at the production time remaining and realizes there are still about 2 hours left before it's completed. He quickly explains that he can handle it using his magic. But Chris doesn't believe him. With a look of pity, she tells him to stop saying such nonsense, as if a man could possibly use magic. But Shiro continues to insist, asking her to wait just 1 more hour, 54 minutes, and 34 seconds. The oddly specific timing makes Chris raise an eyebrow, clearly noticing how precise he's being. After a moment, she finally agrees. She says that, either way, they'll make their escape in the middle of the night, and once the 2 hours have passed, he's going to help her sever her arm. Those words leave Shiro frozen with dread, his face paling as he nervously acknowledges the weight of her condition. After some time passes, Chris reminds Shiro that the 2-hour mark is approaching, bringing up her plan once again. But Shiro quickly tells her, no, not yet, urging her to wait another 27 minutes. Confused, she questions him, asking what he means and how he could possibly know the time without hearing the bells. Shiro calmly explains that he can track the time accurately with his watch. He lifts his hand and shows it to her, revealing the small device on his wrist. Chris is still not convinced by his idea. In frustration, she aggressively grabs the tool she had planned to use to sever her arm and shouts that she's had enough. Just as she's about to go through with it, Shiro yells for her to wait just a little longer. His mind races as he desperately tries to figure out what he needs to do, how he can possibly make her hold on for another 27 minutes. But Chris remains unconvinced. In a defeated tone, she tells him this is the only way and pleads with him to let her do it her way. Seeing how dire the situation has become, Shiro blurts out that she should have intercourse with him. Chris freezes, her expression going completely blank in shock as she asks him what on earth he's saying. She quickly tells him that this is hardly the time for something like that. In a nervous tone, Shiro explains that he's terrified of her tearing off her wrist and pleads with her to give him the courage he needs. Chris lets out a slow sigh, acknowledging his request. Then, with a newfound confidence in her voice, she tells Shiro that she'll give him the strength he's asking for. Her response catches him completely off guard, leaving him stunned by how unexpectedly she agreed a small but meaningful victory in his desperate attempt to convince her. Unfortunately, they couldn't use the bunk since it was broken, and Chris asks Shiro if he minds. He simply comments that the stone beneath them is cold. With a soft reply, Chris assures him that she'll keep him warm. And as the moments pass, she quietly realizes that it's true, she really is warm. As they get down to it, Shiro quickly realizes that she's being far too forceful. At this pace, it'll be over in no time. He grits his teeth and tells himself to hold on for dear life just until it's done. Another 22 minutes, that's all he needs. He focuses on enduring every second, counting down in his mind. And then, after the 22 minutes finally pass, a panel pops up before him, notifying him that the production time has been completed. That realization hits him like a strange coincidence. It finishes at the exact same moment he does. In a tired, exhausted voice, Chris asks Shiro if that was enough for him. Shiro catches his breath and answers simply, yes. She tells him it's time to get ready, but before she can move, Shiro calls out to her, telling Chris to look. He raises his palm, using his hand as the place where something begins to appear. A file suddenly pops up before them, leaving Chris completely stunned. She stares at it in disbelief and questions whether that really just appeared out of thin air. Shiro then explains that he's been working on the file since yesterday using his creation magic. Using the iron bars from the windows, he crafted it specifically to cut through the handcuffs. He looks at her and asks what she thinks about his creation magic. But Chris is still in complete disbelief. She stutters, struggling to find the words to process what just happened right before her eyes. Then suddenly an idea flashes through her mind. She narrows her eyes and asks Shiro if he's actually a woman. Shiro immediately denies it, though his tone lacks conviction. After grinding away at the handcuffs for a while, Shiro tells Chris to pull on the chain. She braces herself and tugs, and with a sharp snap, the handcuffs finally break apart. As it happens, Chris feels her magic come flooding back, overflowing through her once more. With a wide grin, she realizes the magic resist effect has finally worn off, and she commends Shiro for helping her. She flexes her wrist, and the remaining handcuffs snap instantly. Then she raises her arm, power gathering in her palm, as she conjures her magic once again. The magic shoots straight toward the door, striking the guard outside and dropping him instantly. She calmly explains that she used a sleeping mist spell, one that will keep the guard unconscious until morning. Then she tells Shiro to step aside. As he moves, she raises her foot, ready to act. She stomps on the bunk with such force that it completely shatters into pieces, wood splintering in every direction. From the debris, she grabs a sharp wooden plank. A confident smile crosses her face as she realizes this is going to work. Her physical strength is operating just as it always has. She doesn't tell Shiro, though, that they're planning to leave through that window. She then conjures some magic in her right arm, making it sharp. Then she leaps up in the air and swipes her hand at the window, which completely shatters the window. This makes Shiro completely astonished by her power, and in an impressed tone, she questions if Shiro was surprised, because not many have this much magic power. She then leaps up into the window and pulls Shiro out as well. They arrive at a building, and Chris explains that that was the chapel, and there was a secret passage underground that leads out of the castle. She explains to him that she was going to take care of the guards, and he has to wait here. Immediately, Chris charges forward at the guards, taking each of them with ease. Which makes you wonder and question, maybe he should have stayed in the prison. But then, a thought flashes to his mind. remembering those ugly, razor-like teeth, women about to do a despicable thing to him. And then he shakes his head, trying to forget that encounter, and realizes it would probably be worse if he had stayed. Then he convinces himself that he was going to go with Chris. Once they got into the chapel, they realized there was a statue, and once they opened that, a passageway with a staircase leading downstairs opens up. Chris explains that the passage leads to the pedestal of the bronze statue in Monson Park, and from there, they will head for the Philippe fishing harbor. Shiro places his hands on either side of the wall, and he realizes that the entrance was closing. As they walked further down into the... While she explains the locations, Shiro can't help but feel lost. Chris explains that there will be to procure a boat and sail east, and questions if he understands, and he affirms that he does understand. Shiro then gives a look of disappointment, and then he stares at the sea, muttering, "The sea again, huh?" After escaping from the castle, we find Shiro and Chris traveling on a small boat with barely enough space for two. Shiro spends most of the time having weird dreams about Chris, while Chris herself takes charge of the boat like a seaworthy captain. When Shiro wakes up, it takes him a second to realize what's going on. He finally remembers how he had to escape the castle with Chris through an underground passage. And now both of them are stuck in the middle of the sea, with no help in sight. While making their escape, Shiro recalls how they were spotted by guards several times. But Chris defeated all of them like a demonic, unstoppable force. The duo then hijacked a fisherman's boat and set sail in the middle of the night. Of course, Chris knew how to control the boat. She is accomplished in both fighting and random skills. Shiro can't help but be constantly impressed by her. Now, here they are. Two prisoners who have escaped the clutches of their captors with nowhere to go. Even though Chris is more than capable of handling the situation, Shiro is still worried about their fate. Since Shiro has no idea how long they will be left stranded in the middle of the sea, he decides to use his creation skill to make drinkable water. The process is not that complex, and it requires very little energy. Creating the pot and some other tools has allowed Shiro to excel in tool production. With his remaining energy, he intends on creating some bread as well, although the process will take an hour and it requires a lot of energy. Warm bread is exactly the type of sustenance that could help them out. While waiting for the water and bread to be done, Shiro learns that his energy will slowly recover when he is not using magic. Every minute, he will restore 1 energy. Little by little, Shiro is learning more about his abilities and how to utilize them properly. After some time, Shiro informs Chris that the drinking water is finally ready. Chris is extremely grateful to Shiro because now they have a better chance of survival. In fact, she sees Shiro as her guardian angel. Hearing someone call him a guardian angel is entirely new to Shiro, so he feels very shy about it, especially when the words are coming from a good-looking girl. However, the cute moment gets cut short when Chris sees an island in the distance. Shiro still can't spot the island, but Chris is already in action. She starts aggressively steering the small boat towards the distant shore. Slowly, this island comes into view, and Shiro can finally see it as well. The island is not that big, but it definitely holds potential. This could be a turning point for Shiro and Chris. The waves sweep over the island, lush and lined with coconut trees. Shiro and Chris lie on the sandy bank, exhausted from their long journey, listening to the rhythm of the sea as they catch their breath. This place is a true tropical paradise, completely different from the endless sea. While Shiro relaxes on the sand, Chris quickly jumps into the air. One moment, she is on the ground, and the next, she is almost flying towards the palm trees. The girl then comes back down with several coconuts in her hands. Securing food is an important priority right now, and Chris wanted to get a head start. Both Chris and Shiro have adjusted to life on the island fairly quickly. Chris suggests that they should scout the surrounding areas. If there are inhabitants to be found, then perhaps they can help Chris and Shiro figure out where they are. There is also the possibility of dangerous monsters lurking around. Right on cue, as soon as Chris mentions monsters, Shiro gets distracted by rustling nearby. A small slime seems to be lurking near some bushes. This is Shiro's first time seeing a slime in real life, so naturally he feels a little defensive and scared. However, from Chris's attitude, it is clear that slimes are not that dangerous. Apparently, if you get close to a slime, these creatures will only cover you in a digestive fluid. If the fluid is not washed off, then it could lead to some minor skin irritations. In fact, Slimes are mostly known for eating human excrements and garbage, so it is best to not kill them at all. With that being said, Chris and Shiro decide to take a look around the island by walking along the coast. However, their path is blocked by the dense forest extending forward. Instead of coming up with a solution, Chris casually asks Shiro to jump on her back. This odd request leaves Shiro feeling very confused. Chris just wanted to carry Shiro on her back while she jumps all over the island. According to her, this is easier than walking on the ground. Her strength and speed are impressive, but also terrifying to poor Shiro. He is left screaming for his life as Chris effortlessly runs around the forest. It is very hard for Shiro to hold on because of how fast Chris is running. He ends up almost falling over because he can no longer grab Chris for support. Meanwhile, Chris is confused why Shiro is letting go of her all of a sudden. The sudden momentum causes Shiro to slam into Chris, and his hands end up resting on top of her chest. Even though Shiro feels embarrassed, Chris doesn't mind at all. She finds the entire situation quite entertaining, and Shiro's reaction makes it all the more fun for her. After traveling through the dense forest, Chris and Shiro find themselves facing a thicket of bushes. There is no way for them to continue, so Chris takes matters into her own hands. Quite literally, she uses her hands to quickly clear out the thicket, creating a path for them to cross. Clearing the thicket only reveals a larger cliff, which Chris has no problem climbing. The entire time, Shiro is also on her back, and he is simply amazed by Chris. She doesn't show any signs of exhaustion at all. This makes Chris realize just how remarkable magic is. It takes half a day for Chris and Shiro to finally explore the entire island. From their little excursion, Shiro creates a small map of the island. It has a circumference of 25 kilometers. There is a small mountain in the middle of the island, with normal vegetation covering most of the land. There are no monsters besides slimes and some common animals. These findings are quite useful, but running around all day has left Chris feeling hungry as well. She wants to eat some of the fruits they have gathered so far, but Shiro has something even better. His bread is finally ready to be consumed. Shiro very lovingly offers his bread to Chris. She marvels at the boy's ability to create bread using his skills. But she finds his cute demeanor even more fascinating. Shiro is really leaning into the cute, hardworking boy act, and it seems to be working. After having a small break, Chris and Shiro decide to explore the mountain in the middle of the island. Before embarking on yet another adventure, Chris decides that they need to have a cave in the area. This location is a perfect spot for some sort of shelter. The only problem is that there are no caves in sight. However, Chris intends on using the might of her hands once more to carve out a cave in the mountainside. At this point, Shiro is getting used to Chris's bizarre feats of power. Instead of watching the girl create a cave with her bare hands, Shiro decides to head back to the beach and gather some more water and food. When Shiro finally comes back with more supplies, Chris is already done. From the looks of it, this time, Chris has really outdone herself. Shiro stares in awe at the cave entrance, which looks more like the door to a luxury hotel. The inside of the cave is even more impressive. It has proper walls, ceiling, and floor. There is even furniture inside that was carved out by Chris. She managed to create not only a bed, but also a table with 2 chairs. In his awe, Shiro completely forgets to say anything. So, Chris has to ask him if this little cave is going to be suitable. For Shiro, this place is more than enough. His surprise and shock are enough to make Chris feel embarrassed. Now that shelter is no longer an issue, Chris takes a moment to understand whether Shiro wants to move forward. The sea has swept them towards the east. If they continue in this direction, then they will come across the border garrison at Bawanda Castle. However, the situation in Bawanda is not exactly favorable. There has been fighting going on between the Bawanda troops and the Imperial Army. Even though the situation is not exactly what Chris was hoping for, Bawanda is still known for fertile fields and plenty of security. If they decide to go there, then Chris and Shiro can continue their lives together for a good long time. Hearing this makes Shiro feel a little confused, but also comforted. Hearing someone like Chris sound so confident makes Shiro feel better, but he is not sure if he wants to continue towards the east. Back at the cave, Chris decides she'll gather some palm fronds. While she's at it, she figures she might as well scout along the river for any animals they could eat. She glances over at Shiro and Greens, pointing out that he'll need more than just fruit to keep his energy up. Shiro nods and says he'll search for sturdy plants they can use to craft bags, something to carry whatever they harvest. Shiro pops open his panel and notes that, since he found some sturdy vines, he'll use them to craft a proper harvesting bag right after the bread he's baking is finished. He realizes he'll earn more XP for that too, which means he'll finally level up a little more, and once he levels up, he'll be able to create even more things. The thought excites him. But before he can finish imagining what comes next, the idea lingers in his mind. He slowly looks up at the sun, lost in quiet anticipation. Chris finally returns from gathering plants and cheerfully calls out to Shiro, telling him to take a look at what she made. Sitting proudly inside the cave is a king-sized bed. With a satisfied smile, she tells him that tonight they'll finally be able to sleep comfortably. But as she admires her handiwork, she can't help noticing there's only one bed. Truthfully, she had planned from the very beginning that they would share it, and despite everything, she finds herself quietly glad about that. With a proud expression, Chris takes a step back to admire her work. She realizes it may not be a proper bed, not like the ones back at the prison, but even so, she's genuinely proud of what she managed to build. Just as Shiro tries to tell her something, she quickly cuts him off. Lowering her gaze slightly, she apologizes for not catching anything impressive during her hunt. She admits she may have made him expect meat for dinner, and she feels bad about that. Then, her tone turns serious. Once they escape this island, she says, fighting will likely be inevitable. They need to stay strong, vigorous, and prepared. Tomorrow, she promises, she will definitely... But before she can finish her sentence, Shiro suddenly interrupts her. And then, out of nowhere, Shiro blurts out that she should just leave him there. The words hang in the air for a moment, heavy and unexpected. Chris freezes, her eyes widening in pure shock. She hadn't prepared herself for that, not even close. Not fully processing what he had just said, Chris stares at him in disbelief. For a moment, she wonders if she even heard him correctly. And then, still shaken, she finally speaks up, questioning him, trying to understand what he meant. Shiro lowers his gaze and explains that in a real fight, he's useless. He would only slow her down. He knows Chris is strong, unbelievably strong. But even with that strength, she was captured once before. And if she has to protect him too, then one day she might get captured again. Or worse, she might die. He tells her that if his magic continues to level up, he might eventually be able to build something better. A high-performance boat, powerful tools, maybe even equipment that could help her in battle. But he lingers on that word. And then, after a quiet pause, he looks at her and asks if she's in a hurry. As Shiro finishes explaining himself, he notices something in Chris's expression. She's sad. The weight of his proposal had clearly reached her. Trying to reassure her, he tells her he'll be fine. With his magic, he can create the essentials he needs to survive. She doesn't need to look back. She should head east and focus on recovering. But Chris can't hold it in anymore. Before he can say anything else, she suddenly rushes forward and wraps her arms tightly around him. Chris clutches onto Shiro tightly, and through trembling breaths, she asks him to forgive her. Her voice cracks as the words leave her mouth, and as she buries her face against his chest, she begins to sob. As night finally settles in, Shiro lies back on the bed, completely exhausted, feeling just how drained he truly is. Chris watches him with an amused smile, teasing that he's grown surprisingly bold lately, something she never expected. Shiro gives her the credit, saying it's all thanks to her guidance, and as he reflects on everything, he realizes just how far he's come in such a short time. Chris laughs softly, commenting that she's never known a man so composed during the day, yet so passionate when the sun goes down. A man disciplined by daylight, but fearless at night. And just as the moment settles between them, a sudden notification flashes across Shiro's panel. Chris notices the sudden change in Shiro's expression and asks him what's wrong. Shiro blinks, then tells her it's nothing bad, he just finished crafting the harvest bag. And in that exact moment, he realizes something incredible. He leveled up. Even though there wasn't any dramatic flash or explosion of light, he could feel it. So he quickly opens his status panel to confirm it. And there it was, creation magic, now level 2. His MP had increased significantly as well. For Shiro, this wasn't just good news. It was a major step forward. Shiro realizes that with his MP increased, he can finally create things that were previously out of reach. Still, aside from that boost, everything else remains unchanged. Chris tilts her head and asks him how he's feeling. Shiro answers with a small, proud smile. Their original plan of 6 loaves of bread for breakfast? That's about to become 9. Chris's eyes light up at that. She laughs, saying that's certainly one way to start the morning right. Then, in a teasing tone, she tells him there's no need to rush things, although she supposes he doesn't exactly level up as quickly in other areas, especially not compared to how he's improved in bed. Shiro immediately blushes, quietly muttering her name in embarrassment. Seeing his reaction, Chris bursts into laughter, and that only makes him even more flustered. With that, they wrap up their conversation, agreeing that tomorrow is going to be a long day and they should get some rest. The next morning, Shiro is already outside, gathering fruit beneath the warm sunlight. As he reaches into the trees one last time, he notices his basket is completely full. He pauses for a moment, weighing it in his hands, then nods to himself. That should be enough for now. With a small toss to settle the fruit properly inside, he adjusts the basket and prepares to head back. Shiro opens his panel, his expression turning serious as a troubling thought crosses his mind. They don't even know how far this island is from the mainland. If Chris were to set out alone, how long would it take her to reach land? He quickly begins estimating. At the very least, she would need enough food and water to last a week. Assuming she needs 2 liters of water per day, that means they would need at least 4 full water jugs prepared in advance. The calculation weighs heavily on him. Then he remembers something else he learned. While gathering fruit, a knife is absolutely essential. Trying to harvest with bare hands had been far more difficult than he expected. Unfortunately, he still doesn't have enough MP to create a proper blade with magic. So instead, he chips away at a stone, crafting a crude stone knife by hand. The difference is immediate. Cutting and harvesting becomes much easier. As he continues refining the edge, trying to improve its usability, Chris suddenly calls out to him in the distance, and he looks up to see her dragging something heavy toward him. Chris finally reaches him, and with a proud grin, she reveals her catch. A massive wild boar. She explains that she brought it down with a single magic arrow. But while she succeeded in the hunt, she admits she has no idea how to properly butcher something this large. Shiro stares at the creature in disbelief. It's enormous. Chris mentions she already drained the blood for now, but beyond that, she doesn't know how to clean or break it down. So together, they drag the heavy boar toward the brook. As they move it, Shiro realizes something uncomfortable. When it comes to fish, he can manage. But a beast this size? That's a completely different story. Then Chris calmly raises her arm. She channels magic to her wrist, shaping it like a blade, mimicking the edge of a sharp sword. Without hesitation, Chris steps forward. With one swift, decisive slash, the massive boar is cleanly split in half. Shiro's eyes widen. Wait, what about the hide? The organs! He shouts. Chris pauses for half a second, realizing he's right. And then her arms blur. Moving at an almost inhuman speed, she works through the carcass with precise, controlled strikes. In mere moments, the hide is peeled away. The organs are removed cleanly. What remains is nothing but neatly separated cuts of raw meat. Shiro stares at the sheer volume of it. There's so much. Even if they had salt, it wouldn't be enough to preserve all of this. Chris wipes her hands and glances at the pile thoughtfully. Maybe we could smoke it instead? She suggests. Working together, they quickly put a plan into motion. Shiro explains the design, and Chris wastes no time. With a clean strike, she fells a nearby tree, carving the wood with effortless precision. In no time at all, they fashion a crude but sturdy smoking box. Chris then channels her fire magic, a steady, controlled flame building beneath the chamber. Slowly, the rich scent of smoking meat begins to rise into the air. The preservation process had begun. Shiro watches the smoke curl upward, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. They actually pulled it off. But as he stands there, arms folded, something weighs on his mind. He had told her he would be fine on his own. He said she could leave without worrying about him. And yet, seeing how easily she handled everything, the tree, the construction, the fire, he can't help but admit to himself, without her, surviving here might be far harder than he let on. As night finally settles over the island, they finish their meal and get on with their smelly business. As they continue on with their smelly business, Shiro begins to notice that she's more intense than usual. It feels as though she's trying to take in every part of him, holding nothing back. Sensing the shift, Shiro calls out to Chris, his voice strained but steady, saying that he has a request for her. He shifts their positions, gently guiding her beneath him as he moves to the top. And in that moment, he realizes it truly is a fresh view. The change catches him off guard, in the best way. Chris lets out a soft giggle, amused as she admits she never imagined she'd find herself in that position instead. With a teasing smile, she tells him to move however he sees fit. Shiro exhales, a quiet determination settling in, and tells her he'll do exactly that. The next day, Shiro helps Chris pack all the necessities onto her boat, preparing for the journey ahead. On the boat, Chris realizes, so this was it, huh? She then asks Shiro if he's all right, noticing that he seemed to have run out of steam last night. Shiro blushes but quickly assures her that he's fine. Chris admits that it was her first time having a man on top of her, but insists it wasn't bad at all. She comments on how adorable he looked while working so hard, which sends Shiro into extreme embarrassment. He yells at her to stop, insisting that's not something she should say at a time like this. Chris can't help but laugh at his reaction. Shiro then sets all the jokes aside and calls out to Chris, telling her that he wishes her the best of luck. She returns the sentiment, reminding him to take care, and teasingly adds that she would have gladly taken him as a concubine. As Shiro waves at her, he reflects on himself, unsure about the idea of joining the harem. He watches quietly as she drifts away, disappearing into the sea. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you dropped a like and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more manga content coming your way, so stay tuned. See you in the next one.